Boys, the biggest debate in the UFC is who is the GOAT of the sport. So I have the definitive top 15 MMA GOATs of all time. You guys can't argue with these takes. Moving on to some honorable mentions, we have DDP. Look, he's got 3 title wins. He's undefeated in the UFC. This guy knocked out Robert Whittaker. He subbed Izzy, and he beat Sean Strickland twice. I understand that the first win was a bit of a robbery, but come on, at the end of the day, the second win, he 50-45 to him. So you can't really hold that against him just because the judges put it in his favor. And if you actually go back and watch the fight, it was a lot closer than people like to talk about it. I think once he started using the takedowns, I think there's a big argument that he actually did win that fight. So I think DDP, if he were to beat like Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 319, definitely going to be in the top 10. And if he were to maybe defend his belt against like an Amavov, then a Rainier to Ritter, I think we could be seeing this guy be the middleweight GOAT and possibly like end as a top 5 fighter of all time because he's building up a bit of an all-time resume right now. Dominic Cruz. I know a lot of people think about him as like the bantamweight GOAT, the greatest bantamweight of all time. It's not true, okay? Marav Devashili is the bantamweight GOAT. I'm telling you right now, I understand Dominic Cruz is like 7 title wins, but you actually look at some of these wins. He's got like Mighty Mouse, that's a good win. Uriah Faber, TJ Dillashaw, and then it falls off a cliff. He has no better wins than that. And if you look at the second half of his career, it's like a win one, lose one type of fighter. Losing to like, oh, the Cody Garbrandt loss. That's like one of the worst losses in the sport. Although I will say, people are always talking about that like it's the most dominant win in history. When you actually watch the fight, Dominic Cruz won 2 of those rounds. So it wasn't actually like that dominant of a loss, but you can't be one of the goats if you're having people emoting on you in your prime. So moving on to another honorable mention, we have Jose Aldo. There's an argument that he could be in the top 15. I wouldn't mind putting him over the person that I have at 15, which I think is Anderson Silva. But 11 title wins, again, it's like you look at the competition that he was fighting back then, and it's just the moment the competition started to get good, the moment we have like the McGregors, the Holloways, the Volkanovskis, he just starts losing, and people like to say he was out of his prime, but come on, I mean, can you really be out of your prime at 30 years old? I don't think so. Jose Aldo is the only fighter to hit his prime at 25, and then the moment he loses, he's no longer in his prime. None of his losses count. But like he lost to Peter Yan, he lost to Marab. Those are decent losses. Like you can't hold that against him too much. But like the Mario Batista loss, the Ayman Zahabi loss at a UFC 315. So, but he does have some good wins. I think his bantamweight career actually pushes him forward a lot more than just his featherweight career alone would have done. I think the fact that he has this longevity where he's able to not get taken down by Marab or Mario Batista, I think it definitely, if he were to get a few more wins, I could put him in the top 15. I think his career is pretty much over. Actually, he's retired now, so. But it's one of the greatest careers in UFC history. Just because he's not in the top 15 doesn't mean like anything against him. Like he's still the 16th greatest fighter in history. I mean, come on. Anderson Silva at number 15. I wouldn't mind putting Jose Aldo above him. The reason I put Anderson Silva in the top 15 is I know that the level competition he's fighting isn't as good as like modern day middleweights or even the competition that like a Jose Aldo would be fighting, but he had the 16 fight win streak. He was one of the most dominant champions in UFC history. He didn't start losing until the second half of his career. But then he did start losing. He went on like I think he won one out of his last 8 fights. He was losing to like Cormier, some randoms out of Ryzen too before he got to the UFC. But he did have that 16 fight win streak, longest in UFC history, the 13 title wins. And honestly, if he hadn't been caught by Chris Weidman that one time, I think he could have won that fight. So one of the greatest careers, one of the greatest primes, definitely a good top 15. Daniel Cormier at number 14. People are going to be upset about this and say he should be higher. But I think once you see the people that I ranked above him, you'll understand this ranking because the only guys that he lost to is Jones and Stipe, which the greatest of all time and the greatest heavyweight of all time. So there's genuinely no shame in that. He also beat Stipe once. He beat Gustafsson. Any time that Jones was gone for like popping on steroids or drugs or whatever was going on at the time. Daniel Cormier would come in, win the belt, and just dominate the entire division. So he beat Anderson Silva, he beat Dan Henderson, he beat like Roy Nelson, Josh Barnett. So he has a pretty good resume, really good. The Stipe win definitely carries him. He's also a double champ, light heavyweight and heavyweight. So definitely has to be in the top 15. I just don't think that his resume compares to some of these other people on the list, but he's one of my favorite fighters of all time. So I had to put him in this. Merab Devalshili, the bantamweight GOAT. I'm telling you, okay, I know he only has one title defense. I know there's only 2 title wins. But this guy's on a 12-fight win streak in the modern age against, look at the competition that he's been fighting, okay? Listen, when I'm talking about, I said this in my last video, when I'm talking about the GOATs of the sport, I don't care about title wins. I'm not just going to say, like, okay, Demetrius Johnson has the most title wins, so he's the GOAT, and then it goes GSP, and then Jon Jones. I'm not going to do that. Title wins don't matter. What matters is resume and longevity and wins and losses. That's all that matters when it comes to the GOAT debate. So when we're looking at Merab, he lost his first 2 fights in the UFC, which you could chalk that down to he just wasn't fully invested into the sport, or maybe he was trying to figure out his style still. After those first 2 losses, dominates. 12-fight win streak. And you look at some of these wins, like Peter Yan, Jose Aldo, Henry Cejudo, these were before he won the title. These were just on his come up. So, like, people back in the day, Anderson Silva's time, they would get title shots after 3 wins, 2 wins. Somebody like Merab has to win like 10 times before he gets a title shot. And he's doing it against better competition too. So I don't think we can count title wins, at least not comparing title wins in different ages. I think if you want to say Merab has 2 title wins and O'Malley had 3, that would be fair because they're both fighting in the modern age. They're fighting against the same fighters. But we can't compare 2 different ages and title wins. Sean O'Malley and the Umar wins, those are all amazing wins. Even like a Marlon Moraes win where he almost got caught with that choke. I think he's a top 15 fighter of all time. I think if he beats O'Malley, I might put him in my top 10. I also think he's the bantamweight GOAT just because of the level of competition that he's doing and the amount of dominance that he's showing in his fights. Max Holloway. Look, I've seen a lot of GOAT videos from people, and I never see them put Max Holloway in their list. But he beat Jose Aldo twice. I see everybody, Jose Aldo in the top 5. Max Holloway beat him twice. Beat him when he was young in the sport. Beat him for the belt. He also beat Korean Zombie, set records against Calvin Kattar, Arnold Allen, Charles Oliveira. People forget about that win. That's one of his most underrated wins of all time. Frankie Edgar, Anthony Pettis, even Jeremy Stevens. He's got an all-time resume. People tend to forget about it. I understand he has those 2 losses to McGregor, or not to McGregor. He has the 1 loss to McGregor, 2 losses to Poirier, and he did lose 3 times to Volk, but like you look at the span of his career, 5 title wins in the featherweight division, 2nd greatest featherweight of all time. I think you have to put him in your top 15. I have him at number 12, which I think is fair. If he were to beat a Dustin Poirier, I don't know if I would move him up anymore, maybe a spot, but I think if he loses to Poirier, actually, I might have to move him down below Merab, especially if Merab wins at 316, but we'll see. Israel Adesanya at number 11. Now, people hate on Izzy a lot, and I understand that. I used to hate Izzy. Like, I rooted against him against Strickland, and I rooted for Dreykus, and I even rooted for Mavov. That was kind of crazy, I'm not going to lie. But, like, you look at his career, 8 title wins, only person to knock out Pereira. He beat Whitaker twice. I understand one of those fights was a little bit of a robbery, but if you go back and watch it again, like, you can't just look at close fights and say that they're a robbery whenever your favorite fighter lost, or whenever you don't like the guy who won. Like, that was the same thing with Jose Aldo I forget who he fought, but it was at UFC 315. It wasn't a robbery. The other guy clearly won, but all the comments are talking about it. The same with the Alex Pereira loss against Magomed Ankalaev. We can't just call close fights robberies. Yoel Romero, Kelvin Gastelum in one of the greatest fights of all time. Jared Cannonier, which has aged really well. Marvin Vettori. So he has an all-time resume for sure. He didn't really start losing until after the Sean Strickland loss, or I guess after the Pereira loss, actually. And then he just lost to Strickland, lost to Dreykus, lost to Amavov. But it was all at the end of his career. He tried to go for double champ status, but he lost to Han Blachowicz. But I think he's a top 15 fighter of all time. I think if he were to make a comeback, maybe if he were to win against... I've heard rumors are doing a rematch with Strickland. I think if he were to avenge that loss against Strickland, it would look really good on his resume. But at number 10, we have Stipe Miocic. He's another fighter who I don't see people put on their GOAT list a lot, but then they come out here and say that he's the heavyweight GOAT. So how are you going to have somebody be the GOAT of a division and not put him in your top 15? It doesn't make any sense. He beat Daniel Cormier twice. He beat Ngannou. He beat Overeem. He beat JDS. He beat Andrei Arlovsky. He beat Fabricio Werdum, who I think is the third greatest heavyweight of all time. And he only has that one loss to Cormier. He lost to Ngannou, and he lost to JDS. So he also did technically lose to Jon Jones, but I'm not going to count that loss just because he was, 42 years old. He hadn't fought in 3 years. I'm not going to count that. That was just John ducking Tom Aspinall. 6 title wins in the heavyweight division, which is the most anybody has defended the belt. Definitely a top 15 fighter. I don't think that there's any argument that you could put over him I see people a lot of the time put like Daniel Cormier over him. I think if you beat somebody twice, you should be above them in the GOAT debate. Unless we're talking about like you make your UFC debut, you beat like Holloway twice, and then you dip. Like, I don't know if you can put... But when it comes to somebody with an in-depth resume like this, and he beats Cormier twice, you have to put him above Cormier. That's just how this is going to work. At number 9, in the top 10, we have Demetrius Johnson, Mighty Mouse, with 12 title wins. I understand. Everybody's going to be like, no, Mighty Mouse is the GOAT, dude. Look at some of these wins and tell me that this is a GOAT resume, especially compared to like Islam or Jon Jones or GSP. Henry Cejudo, that's a good win. We got Joseph Benavidez, pretty good. John Dodson's pretty good. Falls off a cliff. We're getting like one championship fighters that he's losing to. He got like knocked out in one championship. Okay, my friends always say I'm hating on Demetrius Johnson all the time. I'm not hating on him. He's one of my favorite fighters. He's just... he came into the flyweight division and he was literally fighting people who were coming off the Contender Series for belts. Like, I know he has 12 title wins, but it wasn't against a great level of competition. I think if he were to fight in the modern age, I think he'd still be winning, which is why I have him so high. I think he could beat a Pantoja. I think he could beat like a Brandon Moreno, a Brandon Royval, or like a Tatsuro Taira. I think he's the most skilled flyweight of all time. That's why I have him in my top 10. I just think his resume isn't there. His skill set is clearly there. If you look at his fights, you can see he's one of the most skilled fighters of all time. It's just his resume isn't very in-depth. He lost a lot at bantamweight. But when we're just talking about his flyweight career, I think definitely one of the greatest fighters of all time. If he had fought in the modern age, I think he'd be a lot higher. I think he'd even be like a top 3 fighter of all time, but it's just unfortunate. He also lost to the Henry Cejudo and Dominic Cruz, which isn't a great look on his resume, but Henry Cejudo did go on to be a double champ, so it's not that horrible, but also just the losses and one championship. We can't keep talking about Mighty Mouse like he's the GOAT of the sport. We just can't, because like it's great to say that and all, but he just did not beat the best people like somebody like an Islam did. But if we move on to number 8, Ilia Topuria. This is not rage bait, okay? Listen to what I have to say. He only has 2 title wins, but he's undefeated in the UFC. Look at this resume here. Alexander Volkanovski, knockout. Max Holloway, knockout. Josh Emmett, 10-7'd him, dominated him the entire fight. Bryce Mitchell, subbed him. Jai Herbert, knockout. Like, I understand it's not the deepest resume ever. I understand he hasn't beat a ton of GOATs, but being the first person to ever knock out Max Holloway, being the first person to ever knock out Volkanovski at featherweight, to beat Volkanovski at featherweight, actually. Volkanovski was undefeated at 145 before he fought Ilia Topuria. I understand that he was coming off that knockout loss to Islam, but he had 4 months to recover. I know he may have been a little bit weight drained, but Volk and Holloway were still in their prime when they fought Ilia Topuria. Holloway was only like 32 years old. You see people all the time on Instagram talking about how he was out of his prime, when he just genuinely wasn't. Ilia Topuria was the better boxer and caught him with a punch, a combination that would have knocked out anybody, especially the combination with Alexander Volkanovski. I understand that he was weight drained. I understand he was coming off of a knockout, but that combination would have knocked out anybody in the division. You can't argue against that. So I think Ilia Topuria is a top 8 fighter of all time. And I think if he were to beat a Charles Oliveira and become a double champ at UFC 317, there's an argument he's the 5th greatest fighter of all time. He's in the top 5. And people aren't going to... I know people hate Ilia Topuria because he's knocking out everybody's favorite fighters. That's why I love him, dude. Because this guy, he's making millions of dollars. He's defending his belt. He could just stay at featherweight and become the featherweight GOAT. Instead, he chases after Islam Makhachev, right? He chases after him. Goes up to 155. Islam runs away to 170. I don't want to hear anything else. He's just this guy. He hears about the biggest fan favorites in every division. He just goes after them, trying to knock them all out. I think he just has like hate in his heart for the fans. But I like him. I think he's top 8. You guys can disagree with that, but he's undefeated. So Alex Pereira at number 7. I was considering putting him a little bit lower on the list. I don't know if he's quite top 7, but he does have 5 title wins. And when you look at some of these wins he has, like we're looking at 5 former champions here. We've got Izzy, greatest middleweight of all time, or second greatest middleweight of all time. Jiri Prochazka, those 2 wins over him, those aged really well. Jiri hasn't lost to anybody else. He just came off that knockout win over Jamal Hill. He beat Jamal Hill at UFC 300, the biggest card in the history of the sport. Han Blachowicz, who beat Izzy. Sean Strickland, who also beat Izzy. So I think he's got an all-time resume here. 5 former champions. He's only had like 7 fights in the UFC. I'm pretty sure this is literally his entire resume in the sport. But one thing I will say, if he loses to Magomed Ankalaev again, I'm gonna have to take him out of the top 10 probably, just because like that last fight you could argue that like okay, it was a close fight, but if he wins again, I think it'll just be more dominantly. So I don't think rematching against Magomed is a good idea for Alex Pereira. I actually think he should move up to heavyweight and fight like Volkov in a number 1 contenders match. And I think the fans would like that more, honestly. But I think Alex Pereira is a top 7 fighter of all time. I think if he were to win the heavyweight belt, again, just like Ilia Topuria, top 5 fighter of all time for sure. 3 division champion would be sick. Nobody's ever done it before. And I think out of everybody in the UFC right now, I think he's the most likely to do it. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Look, okay? I know he doesn't have the greatest resume, but neither do the guys like Anderson Silva. Neither did the Demetrius Johnsons. People will talk about Khabib like he fought a bunch of nobodies and then retired from the sport. And then they'll talk like Mighty Mouse, talk about Mighty Mouse like he's the greatest fighter to ever live. He's perfect, undefeated, okay? Khabib Nurmagomedov beat Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, who's a top 5 lightweight of all time, Justin Gaethje. The Michael Johnson win is underrated because Michael Johnson has wins over like Tony Ferguson. He was the first person to beat Tony Ferguson. He beat him before Tony went on that 12-fight win streak. Al La Quinta, which is it's an okay win, and then RDA and Edson Barboza. Those are all decent wins. What I'm saying is, I know early in his career he wasn't fighting the best competition, but towards the end of it, he was. And if he had sticked around in the sport, I think I would have picked him to beat like a Charles Oliveira or a Michael Chandler or like I don't know about an Arman Sarukian, but one of the greatest fighters of all time. He gets a lot of hate, probably mostly from McGregor fans. And I'm a McGregor fan too, but I like Khabib. I think he's a good fighter. And, he was undefeated. How many people do you see with records like that? 29-0. He has the most 10-8 rounds in the history of the sport. I think he's one of the greatest fighters of all time. At number 5, I have Kamaru Usman. A lot of people don't put him even in the top 15, but if you actually look at it, his only 2 losses are to Leon Edwards twice, which has aged really bad, I'll admit. But then the Khamzat Chimaev loss wasn't even a loss, it was a draw. It happened on 8 days' notice, and Kamaru Usman wasn't even booked to fight anybody, so you can't really count that loss against him. It was technically a draw still. So going to a draw with an undefeated Khamzat Chimaev, who's a big favorite to go become the middleweight champion now, I think that's arguably better for his legacy than some of these other wins. But Sean Strickland, that's an underrated win. He dominated Sean Strickland throughout the fight, finished him. 2 wins over Colby Covington, 2 wins over Jorge Masvidal. He beat Tyron Woodley. He beat Gilbert Burns. 6 title wins. He is the second longest win streak in UFC history. He's tied with Islam Makhachev. So I think I have him in my top 5. If he were to beat, who's he booked to fight? Joaquin Buckley. If he were to beat like Joaquin Buckley, somebody from the modern age, and then maybe, I don't even know, get a number one contenders match or even fight for the belt against a JDM. Okay, if he beats Joaquin Buckley and then somehow flukes a win over JDM or something, dude, he's like top 3, top 2 fighter of all time. That would be insane to watch, but I hope that happens too because I like Usman. At 4, I have Volkanovski. Oh, this brings a smile to my face, man. Look at him. You guys remember like a year ago, right after the Ilya Taporia knockout, when you go into like the UFC website and you look up Volkanovski, and it was just that like old fat picture of him with no belt, and he just looks sad. Oh, this brings a smile to my face. Now we see him with the belt. He looks all stoic. He's back in shape. It's great to see. 7 title wins, greatest featherweight of all time. 3 wins over Max Holloway. I think that's the best part of his career, is that trilogy with Max winning almost every round. I think he only lost 2 or 3 rounds against Holloway through that entire trilogy. He did lose to Taporia, but again, he was a bit weight drained. He was moving back down to featherweight from lightweight. The 2 losses to Islam, the first one, there's an argument that he won that fight, and the second one was on a week's notice. It was a fat Volk. He wasn't on a fight camp. He was just moving up. He wasn't prepared to fight at lightweight. So I don't think you can hold that second loss against him too much. I see this more as like 1.5 losses to Islam. And also, I have Islam at number 2 all time. So losing to him 1.5 times and the first fight being as close as it was, I think this is great for his legacy. He's a double champ, or not a double champ, sorry. He's a 2-time champ. He came back and won the belt against somebody from the modern age, one of the biggest contenders, Diego Lopez. He has those wins over like a Yair Rodriguez, a Brian Ortega. Okay, I'm going to make another video about this. If the UFC actually books Yair Rodriguez 2 versus Volkanovski, I'm going to lose my mind because Volk should not be fighting anybody except Evelev, okay? Evelev is on a 12-fight win streak or something, like a 10-fight win streak. He's undefeated in the UFC. He just beat Aljamain Sterling. He beat Arnold Allen. He beat Diego Lopez, who just fought for the belt. So Evelev deserves it more. Yair Rodriguez literally already lost to Volkanovski. Then he lost to Brian Ortega, who lost to Diego Lopez, who lost to Volkanovski. So, and his only win, his last win was against like a 40-year-old Bellator debutant who had never fought in the UFC before, and it was a boring performance. It wasn't even a good fight. He barely won. It was like a 2-1 decision. So I think Volkanovski is one of the greats. I think if he were to beat like an Evelev or a Yair Rodriguez again, I'd put him in my top 3. I would put him over George St. Pierre just because he's fighting better levels of competition. He did the same thing that GSP did where people counted him out. He was old and he came back and won the belt. I think it's a great story, and I love Volkanovski, so I'm going to put him in my top 5 here. Number 3, I have George St. Pierre. 13 title wins, 13-fight win streak, and a 2-division champion. Which, one of the craziest stories in UFC history, I think. Nobody ever talks about it, but to be retired for 2-3 years from the sport and then come back and win the belt again against Michael Bisping is crazy. Submitted Michael Bisping. He does have those losses to Matt Hughes and Matt Serra, but he beat both of them after that. He gained back those losses, and he beat them pretty dominantly, so I think he proved that those losses were both flukes. He beat a prime BJ Penn. He beat Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, John Fitch. So it's not the greatest. It is one of the greatest resumes. It's not the biggest names, but I think when you look at his career as a whole, you just see him dominating literally everybody that he fights. And yes, he has like 1 or 2 losses here and there, but he came back, he beat them again, and then he came back 3 years later against a better competition, and he won the championship belt. So George St. Pierre, one of the greatest fighters of all time. I wish we had seen him versus Khabib when it was a possibility, because I know they could have made that fight. They just decided not to, but I think that would have been sick to watch. And at number 2, I have Islam Makhachev. 27-1, 5 title wins, tied for the second most wins in a row in UFC history with Kamaru Usman. 15-fight win streak. His only loss was against Adriano Martins, but that was clearly a fluke. He got caught with a bad overhand right, and it was a little bit of an early stoppage even. Nobody talks about that, but if you look at the fight again, he goes out, but he's clearly starting to get up when the ref stops it. So And he has those wins over Alexander Volkanovski, Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, Dan Hooker. That's actually a crazy underrated win because he dominated Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker still today is like a top 5 fighter in the lightweight division. Islam dominated him 2 or 3 years ago. So Renato Moicano, Arman Sarukian, even like the Bobby Green and Drew Dober wins. These are all underrated. Islam, I think he has the greatest resume of all time, second greatest resume of all time. I think people still tend to put him outside of their top 5, but I think it's just the Dagestani hate. He's one of the greatest fighters. He's the greatest lightweight of all time. I think everybody agrees with that. People will agree that Islam is the greatest lightweight of all time, and then they'll agree that lightweight is the hardest division, but they still won't put Islam in their top 5. It doesn't make any sense at all. People just hate Dagestanis, but then they'll put Charles Oliveira in their top 15. At number 1, we have Jon Jones. Look, it pains me to say it, okay, because I hate Jon Jones. He's one of my least favorite fighters. I like Tom Aspinall. I hate what Jon Jones is doing. I like Daniel Cormier. I liked Gustafsson. But he has those 2 wins over Cormier, which I hold a Cormier win equal to like a Volkanovski win. So when I'm comparing Jon Jones and Islam, I think like, okay, 2 wins over Cormier, 2 wins over Volkanovski. Those are pretty equal. Gustafsson, though, there's an argument that Islam is just fighting a harder level of competition, that Jon Jones fought like fat middleweights who were fighting at light heavyweight. He also lost to Dominic Reyes. I think if you're one of those people who think like Jon Jones, he popped for steroids, so I can't put him as the GOAT, I think it's fair to say that Islam is already the GOAT. I genuinely do. I think if he were to beat JDM at whenever they're booked to fight, like UFC 321, I don't think it's official yet, but if he beats JDM whenever they fight and becomes a double champ, I will be putting Islam at number 1. Probably just out of hatred for Jon Jones, but also because Islam is fighting better competition. He'll have a longer win streak. He'll be the greatest lightweight of all time. He'll be a double champ. And I think that double champ holds more weight than like Jon Jones's does, because to win the belt off of vacancy from Cyril Gane and then defend it against a fat old Stipe Miocic, it's just not fair. But come on, you look at these wins, like everybody else. Let me go back. See, look at all these wins. I've got like 6 or 7 wins for everybody. And then I go here. I had to make 2 lists for him because of the amount of incredible wins he has. Like Rashad Evans, Glover Teixeira. I was about to say Anthony Smith, but not that one, not that one. But Ryan Bader, Shogun Raw, Vitor Belfort, Rampage Jackson, even Chael Sonnen. Like his 8th best win. It's like Anderson Silva's 3rd best win. So I think he's the greatest fighter of all time. At the very least, I think he has the best resume of all time. But there's just so many things, like the steroids that he did, the drugs that he did, all the partying, all the drinking. It doesn't make sense to me how he keeps winning, but he just does. I think Tom Aspinall would knock the shit out of him if they were to fight nowadays, but I think he's just going to retire, and I think Islam's going to beat JDM, and I think Islam's going to be the GOAT. I think a year from now we'll be talking about Islam like he's the greatest fighter of all time, because I'm going to pick Islam to beat JDM probably. I think that's a harder matchup for him than Ilia Topuria, because I kind of see JDM as like a welterweight, bigger version of Ilia Topuria. So, but I still don't know, because Islam Makhachev is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, so I'm probably going to pick him to win. Probably going to pick him to become the greatest fighter of all time. But let me know what videos you guys want to see. I just made a video like this, pretty similar. It was the top 3 GOATs in each division, so check that out if you want. And let me know what fights you want to see. Let me know what you want to see me break down, and I'll talk to you guys soon.